The Mockingbird's Last Song *, Part 1. The last performance. Sebastian Mockingbird had always believed that life, like music, was about timing. He stood at the tall, arched window of his study, fingers resting lightly on the glass, watching the late autumn mist creep across the lawns of Mockingbird Estate. The grounds were immaculate, too immaculate for a man who claimed to despise order. Gravel paths curved like carefully written notes. Hedges stood trimmed with near military discipline, and the ancient oak at the far end of the garden loomed like a silent conductor awaiting his orchestra behind him. The fire crackled softly. Tonight, the house was full. That alone was unusual. Sebastian Mockingbird was not a man who enjoyed company for its own sake. He enjoyed control. Guests were instruments to be tuned, silenced, or played as needed. Yet, tonight, the long dining table would be occupied by those who had shaped his life, and those whose lives he had quietly shaped in return. He smiled faintly. One last performance. He thought. The estate. Mockingbird Estate sat far from the nearest village, hidden among rolling hills and narrow country roads that twisted like secrets unwilling to be told directly. The house itself was an imposing structure of gray stone and dark wood, built in an era when wealth demanded visibility. Inside, the corridors carried sound strangely. Footsteps echoed too long. Doors whispered even when closed gently. It was the kind of house that remembered conversations. The staff moved with rehearsed precision. They had been preparing for days, polishing silverware that would barely be used, arranging flowers that would wilt unnoticed. They knew better than to ask questions. Working for Sebastian Mockingbird required discretion above all else. Mrs. Holloway, the housekeeper, paused outside the dining room to inspect the table one final time. 10 place settings. 10 guests. She frowned. 10, she murmured. Always 10. She could not explain why the number unsettled her. The guests arrive. The first to arrive was Margaret Mockingbird, Sebastian's wife in name only. She stepped out of her car with the grace of a woman who had long practiced appearing untroubled. Her silver hair was styled impeccably. Her expression calm, but her eyes betrayed exhaustion. She had not lived at the estate for years. Mrs. Mockingbird. Mrs. Holloway greeted her. Margaret smiled politely. Still calling me that, I see. It is still correct, madam. Margaret's smile tightened. For now. She glanced at the house, as if measuring how much of herself she had left behind within those walls. Next came Adrian Bell, Sebastian's former protege. Young, brilliant, and visibly uncomfortable, Adrian clutched his coat as though it were armor. His rise in the world of classical music had been meteoric, largely due to Sebastian's patronage. His fall, however, had been equally swift. Good evening, Adrian said quietly. Mrs. Holloway nodded. Mr. Bell. Adrian hesitated before entering, his gaze lingering on the doorway. For a moment, it looked as though he might turn back. He didn't. Charles Whitmore, business partner and lifelong friend, arrived laughing loudly, his voice filling the courtyard before his feet even touched the gravel. Still standing, he announced, surveying the estate. I told him he should sell the place. Too many ghosts. Mrs. Holloway said nothing. Whitmore's laughter faded as he stepped inside. Others followed. Eliza Crane, Sebastian's private secretary, efficient and observant. Carrying a leather folder she never let out of her sight. Dr. Lionel Graves, the family physician, whose calm demeanor masked a sharp intellect. Clara Finch, a distant cousin Sebastian had only recently rediscovered. Jonathan Reed, a journalist invited under the guise of writing a profile. Mrs. Evelyn Porter, a patron of the arts and long-time admirer. And finally, Sebastian Mockingbird himself, descending the staircase just as the grandfather clock struck 7. The host, Sebastian Mockingbird, was a man carved by contradictions. Tall, thin, impeccably dressed, he carried himself like someone who had never doubted his place in the world. His hair was white, his eyes sharp and restless. Welcome, he said, spreading his arms. All of you. How delightful that you could come. His gaze lingered on each face. Measuring reactions. Margaret met his eyes without flinching. Adrian looked away. Sebastian smiled wider. Dinner is served, he announced. And I promise this evening will be memorable. The meal was exquisite. Wine flowed freely. Conversation began politely, enough safe topics. Rehearsed compliments, careful laughter. But beneath the surface, tension coiled. Sebastian controlled the table effortlessly, guiding discussions, steering memories, provoking subtle discomfort. He reminisced about shared triumphs, casually mentioning moments that others would rather forget. To legacy, he toasted at one point. Such a fragile thing. Margaret set her glass down untouched. Jonathan Reed scribbled notes, his journalist's instincts alert. Adrian's hands trembled slightly as he lifted his fork. Halfway through dessert, Sebastian leaned back in his chair. "There is something I must tell you all," he said casually. The room stilled. "A confession," he continued. "Of sorts. One that will clarify many things." Dr. Graves frowned. "Sebastian, perhaps tomorrow," Sebastian interrupted. "I will reveal everything tomorrow morning." A pause. "Why not tonight?" Whitmore asked, attempting humor. Sebastian's smile was thin. "Because anticipation," he replied, "is far more powerful than truth." The final night after dinner, the guests dispersed. Some retired early. Others lingered by the fire, speaking in hushed tones. Sebastian returned to his study alone. He poured himself a final drink and sat at his desk. Papers lay neatly arranged. A sealed envelope rested at the center. He picked it up, turning it slowly. "So many songs," he murmured. "And this will be the last." He placed the envelope in the desk drawer and locked it. The fire burned low. Outside, the mist thickened. Morning, at precisely 8 o'clock the next morning. Mrs. Holloway knocked on the study door. No answer. She knocked again. Still nothing. A sense of unease crept into her chest. She opened the door. Sebastian Mockingbird sat in his chair, head tilted slightly to one side, eyes closed as if in peaceful thought. For a moment, she believed he was sleeping. Then she saw his face. The stillness. The silence. The Mockingbird had sung his last song. Part 2. A death too. Quiet. The house did not erupt into chaos the way death usually demanded. That, more than anything else, unsettled Mrs. Holloway. She stood frozen in the doorway of Sebastian Mockingbird's study, her gloved hand still resting on the brass handle, as if the door itself might suddenly deny what her eyes were seeing. The room looked unchanged, too unchanged. The fire had died to a bed of gray ash. The curtains were half drawn. The desk was immaculate, and Sebastian Mockingbird sat exactly as he always did, except that he was no longer alive. "Sir?" she whispered. Though she knew the word was useless. She stepped forward, each footfall sounding indecently loud on the Persian rug. She had seen death before: old age, illness, accidents, but this was different. There was no violence, no visible struggle, no spilled glass, no overturned chair. Just silence. She reached out, hesitated, then gently touched his wrist. Cold. Mrs. Holloway recoiled as though burned. Within minutes, the estate stirred awake, but not with screams or hysteria. Instead, doors opened cautiously. Voices remained hushed. Shock expressed itself through restraint, as though the house itself demanded decorum, even in tragedy. Dr. Lionel Graves was summoned first. The doctor's verdict: Dr. Graves knelt beside Sebastian's body, his movements precise, his face unreadable. He checked the pupils, examined the lips, listened for a heartbeat he knew he would not find. "How long?" Margaret asked quietly from the doorway. Graves did not look up. "Several hours. Likely sometime after midnight." "And the cause?" Charles Whitmore pressed. Dr. Graves stood slowly. At first glance, cardiac failure. A collective exhale rippled through the room. "Natural causes, then," Whitmore said, relief edging his voice. Graves hesitated. "At first glance," he repeated carefully. Margaret's gaze sharpened. "Meaning?" "Meaning," Graves said, "that Sebastian Mockingbird was not a man prone to sudden heart failure. His health was managed, controlled." Jonathan Reed scribbled furiously in his notebook until Margaret shot him a look sharp enough to cut glass. "This stays private," she said. "For now." Yes, of course, Reed replied, though his pen did not stop moving. An unwelcome calm by mid-morning. The local authorities arrived, efficient, respectful, and entirely uncurious. Sebastian Mockingbird was wealthy, influential, and elderly. Men like him were allowed to die quietly. The constable took notes. The coroner scheduled a routine examination. No one sealed the estate. No one searched rooms. It appears straightforward, the constable said. No signs of foul play. Margaret nodded. Thank you. As the officers departed, the house seemed to breathe again. Too easily. Adrian Bell stood near the staircase, pale and withdrawn. Eliza Crane whispered urgently into the telephone, her free hand clutching her leather folder. Clara Finch dabbed at dry eyes with a handkerchief that showed no sign of use. Only one person seemed genuinely unsettled. Dr. Graves remained in the study long after the others had drifted away. The arrival of an outsider. It was shortly after noon when a visitor arrived unannounced. He was unremarkable at first glance, short, impeccably dressed, with graying hair and a posture that suggested careful thought rather than physical strength. His accent was refined, his manner polite. My name is Julian Harrow, he said to Mrs. Holloway. I was invited by Mr. Mockingbird. Mrs. Holloway blinked. That is not possible, sir. Mr. Mockingbird is dead, Harrow finished gently. Yes, I am aware. Her eyes widened. Then you must leave at once. On the contrary, Harrow replied calmly. I believe my presence is now more necessary than ever. Margaret Mockingbird appeared behind Mrs. Holloway. Who is this? Julian Harrow inclined his head. Mrs. Mockingbird, I regret that our introduction occurs under such circumstances. You knew my husband? Briefly, Harrow said. Enough for him to request my attendance today. Margaret studied him. For what purpose? Harrow's dark eyes flicked briefly toward the study door. To listen, he said, and to observe. Small details. Harrow was allowed into the study reluctantly. He did not touch anything. He simply stood, hands clasped behind his back, absorbing the room. May I ask, he said softly, why the window is open? Dr. Graves looked up sharply. It was warm last night, was it? Harrow asked. The mist outside had not lifted. Autumn air clung damp and cold to the glass. And the fire, Harrow continued. It was lit? Yes, Graves replied. But allowed to die, Harrow murmured. Interesting. Margaret frowned. What are you implying? Nothing, Harrow said smoothly. Not yet. He moved closer to the desk. Did Mr. Mockingbird smoke? No, Graves answered. Harrow nodded toward a faint scent lingering in the air. Then why do I smell tobacco? Silence followed. The guests reconsidered one by one. Harrow requested brief conversations, not interrogations. Conversations. With Adrian Bell. He spoke of music. With Mr. Whitmore, he spoke of loyalty. With Eliza Crane, he spoke of paperwork and timing. Each time, Harrow asked gentle questions that seemed harmless until the answers contradicted one another. Adrian claimed he retired early. Mrs. Holloway remembered seeing his light. On well past midnight, Whitmore insisted Sebastian was cheerful at dinner. Margaret remembered something sharper in his tone. Eliza Crane insisted no documents were missing. Harrow noticed the locked desk drawer, a death too quiet by evening. The house was restless. What exactly are you suggesting? Margaret finally demanded. Harrow met her gaze steadily. That Sebastian Mockingbird did not die peacefully, he said. But there was no struggle, Whitmore argued. No poison. Graves added. No wounds, Margaret said. Harrow nodded. Precisely. He turned toward the study window, where the mist pressed against the glass like a held breath. Some deaths shout, he said softly. Others whisper. And the most dangerous are those that are too quiet. Margaret felt a chill crawl up her spine. Outside, a bird cried once sharp, brief, and then gone. Part 3. The House of Echoes. Julian Harrow believed that houses spoke, not in words. Of course, nothing so crude, but in impressions, in absences. In the way sound lingered too long in certain corridors and vanished too quickly in others. Mockingbird Estate was particularly talkative, though it revealed its secrets reluctantly, like an old performer unwilling to surrender the applause of the past. Harrow began his exploration alone. He preferred it that way. Corridors. Remember, the main corridor stretched the length of the house, paneled in dark oak polished to a dull sheen. Portraits lined the walls, ancestors, benefactors, forgotten relatives, each frozen in a moment of carefully curated dignity. Sebastian Mockingbird appeared twice among them, once as a young man with ambitious eyes, and once later, older, sharper, more guarded. Harrow paused before the second portrait. "You were already afraid by then," he murmured. The house answered with silence. Footsteps echoed behind him. Eliza Crane approached, her expression composed but alert. "You are wandering," she said. "Yes," Harrow replied pleasantly. "I find it most enlightening. This is a private residence." "It was," Harrow corrected gently. "Now it is a stage after the curtain has fallen." Eliza's fingers tightened around her folder. "You think this was murder?" "I think," Harrow said, "that Mr. Mockingbird enjoyed complexity. It would be unlike him to leave this world without one final arrangement." The study revisited. Harrow returned to the study with fresh eyes. In daylight, the room revealed subtleties missed before. The heavy desk bore faint scratches where objects had been moved repeatedly. A chair leg showed signs of recent adjustment. The ash in the fireplace was disturbed, not by cleaning, but by something being removed. He knelt, examining the hearth. "No accelerant," he murmured. "No papers burned." He straightened and turned to the desk. The locked drawer. Eliza shifted uncomfortably. "Those are personal documents." "Indeed," Harrow said. "And personal documents have a habit of becoming dangerous." Margaret Mockingbird, standing near the door, spoke sharply. "You have no authority to—" "Madam," Harrow interrupted softly. "Your husband invited me because he feared this moment. If you wish me to leave, I shall. But then whatever truth lies here will remain buried with him." Margaret hesitated. Then she nodded once. Eliza unlocked the drawer. Inside lay neatly stacked papers, a sealed envelope, and an empty space, precisely the size of a thin leather-bound notebook. Harrow smiled faintly. "Absence," he said. "Always the loudest clue." The staff speak. The servants' hall was warm, crowded, and uneasy. Mrs. Holloway sat rigidly at the head of the table, hands folded. Harrow addressed them gently. "I am not here to accuse," he said, "only to listen." At first, they offered rehearsed answers. No unusual noises. No visitors. No disturbances. Then Harrow asked a different question. "What did you feel last night?" The cook frowned. "Felt, sir?" "The house," Harrow said. "Did it feel different?" A young maid spoke hesitantly. "It was restless." Mrs. Holloway stiffened. "Emily, I heard footsteps," Emily continued. "Late, in the west corridor. But when I looked, there was no one." Another servant nodded. "I smelled smoke. Not from the fireplace. Something sharper. Tobacco." Harrow thanked them all. As he left, Mrs. Holloway followed him into the corridor. "He was not a kind man," she said quietly, "but he did not deserve fear in his own house." Harrow met her eyes. "Fear," he replied, "is often the final gift we give ourselves." Hidden Spaces Mockingbird Estate had been renovated many times. Too many times. Harrow noticed it in the mismatched floorboards, the slight misalignments in the walls. He pressed gently against a panel near the west corridor. It shifted. Behind it lay a narrow passage, dusty and unused, leading toward the study. "Of course," Harrow murmured. "You liked shortcuts." The passage ended near the fireplace. A hidden door. One that allowed entrance without crossing the study floor. Harrow closed it carefully. Contradictions. He gathered the guests in the drawing room that evening. "Your accounts of last night do not agree," Harrow said calmly. Adrian Bell swallowed. "I told you, I went to bed early." "You went to your room," Harrow corrected. "But you did not sleep." Adrian's face flushed. I was restless." "Understandable," Harrow said. "Your patron planned a confession." Whitmore scoffed. "You're twisting harmless details." "Details," Harrow replied. "Are never harmless." He turned to Margaret. "Your husband was not alone in that study." Margaret's breath caught. "Prove it." Harrow gestured toward the west corridor. "The house itself proves it." The weight of Secrets Night fell again over Mockingbird Estate. Doors were locked. Lights burned longer than necessary. Somewhere within the walls, a secret shifted. Unsettled by attention, Harrow stood alone once more in the study, listening to the echo of his own breathing. "You controlled everyone," he said softly to the empty chair. "But control invites rebellion." Outside, the wind stirred the trees. The house creaked. And for the first time since Sebastian Mockingbird's death, the silence felt strained. Part 4. Songs of the Past. Julian Harrow had always believed that the past was never truly past. It did not remain politely behind people, as memory pretended. It walked beside them, whispered into their ears, guided their hands at critical moments. At Mockingbird Estate, the past was everywhere, embedded in the walls, the furniture, the carefully curated lives of those who remained. Sebastian Mockingbird had built his empire on memory. And now that memory was beginning to sing the first song, Sebastian's rise. Sebastian Mockingbird had not been born powerful. That fact alone irritated him for most of his life. He was the son of a modest merchant, educated well, but never wealthy enough to be secure. Music had been his escape, first as a listener, then as a patron. He had learned early that talent was common, but opportunity was rare. And opportunity, he discovered, could be controlled. By his 40s, Sebastian had become indispensable to the arts. He funded orchestras, sponsored prodigies, rescued failing institutions. His name appeared on plaques, programs, and donor lists. He smiled graciously in public. Privately, he kept records. Careful ones. Julian Harrow sat in the library late into the night, surrounded by ledgers and correspondence Eliza Crane had reluctantly provided. The pattern was unmistakable. Sebastian gave generously, but never freely. Each gift carried an expectation. Each favor created a debt. And each debt was remembered. He collected people, Harrow murmured, like instruments. Margaret Mockingbird. The wife Margaret had loved Sebastian once. That, perhaps, was the cruelest irony. They had met young before the wealth, before the estate, before the careful cruelty. Sebastian had been charming then, ambitious in a way that felt exciting rather than dangerous. Margaret had believed she was building something with him. Instead, she had become part of the structure. Their marriage deteriorated slowly, publicly polite and privately hollow. Sebastian tolerated her independence, but resented her defiance. Margaret refused to be managed. Harrow spoke with her in the morning room, sunlight filtering through lace curtains. "He wanted obedience," Margaret said calmly. "I gave him distance." "Did he threaten you?" Harrow asked. Margaret's lips tightened. Sebastian never threatened. He reminded. She stood and crossed to the window. "He reminded me of what he could take. Reputation, security, silence. Did you fear him?" Harrow asked. Margaret considered this. "No," she said finally. "I feared what he made of people." Adrian Bell. The prodigue Adrian Bell's story was written in sharp contrasts. Discovered young, celebrated quickly, and then discarded. Sebastian had championed Adrian's talent, funding his education, arranging performances, opening doors that would otherwise have remained closed. For a time, Adrian had been grateful. Then he had become dependent. And then inconvenient. Harrow found Adrian in the music room, seated at the piano but not playing. "He said I owed him my life," Adrian said quietly. "And perhaps I did, but he never let me forget the cost." "What happened between you?" Harrow asked. Adrian's hands clenched. "I refused him." "Refused what?" "Control," Adrian said. "He wanted my career shaped to suit his tastes. My music, my choices, even my relationships." "And when you refused?" "He ruined me," Adrian whispered. Quietly. A word here, a suggestion there. Invitations stopped coming. Harrow studied him. "And now he is dead." Adrian looked up sharply. "I did not kill him." "I did not say you did." Harrow replied gently, but the bitterness lingered in the air like a dissonant chord. Charles Whitmore. The partner Charles Whitmore had known Sebastian longer than anyone. They had built fortunes together, navigated scandals, buried mistakes. Whitmore presented himself as the loyal companion, the jovial counterbalance to Sebastian's severity. But loyalty, Harrow knew, was rarely simple dot in the billiard room. Whitmore poured himself a drink with shaking hands. He was planning something, Whitmore said. Something that would have complicated matters. What matters? Harrow asked. Whitmore laughed hollowly. All of them. Harrow leaned forward. Did Sebastian have leverage over you? Whitmore hesitated too long. Yes, he admitted. But I wasn't the only one. Clara Finch, the rediscovered relative Clara. Finch's presence at the estate had raised eyebrows from the beginning. A distant cousin, conveniently reintroduced into Sebastian's life only months earlier. He had paid her debts, elevated her status, installed her within his circle. Why? Harrow found her in the garden, standing near the ancient oak. He said he wanted family, Clara said softly. Said blood mattered in the end. And did you believe him? Harrow asked. She smiled sadly. No, Sebastian Mockingbird never did anything without a reason. What was yours? Harrow pressed. Clara's eyes flickered. Survival. Eliza Crane. The keeper of records Eliza Crane knew everything. That was her power and her prison. She had served Sebastian for over a decade, managing his correspondence, finances, appointments. She knew which secrets were harmless and which were lethal. Harrow met her late at night in the office adjoining the study. You kept his confidences. Harrow said. I was paid too, Eliza replied evenly. And now? She hesitated. Now he is gone. And his secrets are unguarded. Harrow studied her carefully. Someone removed his notebook. Eliza's jaw tightened. Yes. Who had access? Everyone, she said. And no one. The second incident had happened just before dawn. A scream echoed through the west corridor. Servants rushed from their rooms. Guests emerged pale and shaken. They found Jonathan Reed, the journalist, standing outside the hidden passage, his face ashen. The panel was open. He stammered. I was exploring research when I heard something move. Inside the passage, nothing was disturbed. But on the wall, scratched hastily into the wood, were 3 words. Let the song. Ian Harrow stared at the message. This, he said quietly, is not coincidence. Margaret felt a chill spread through her chest. Thought someone in the house was no longer content with silence. The past tightens its grip as the sun rose. Mockingbird Estate felt smaller, heavier. Each guest carried a past that now pressed insistently against the present. Each had been shaped, harmed, or controlled by Sebastian Mockingbird. And someone among them had decided that the final note would not be his to play. Julian Harrow stood, alone once more in the study. Your past is returned, he said softly to the empty chair. And it sings very clearly indeed. Part 5. The False Melody by the 5th Day. Mockingbird Estate no longer pretended to be a house in mourning. It had become something else entirely, a closed instrument. Strings drawn tight, waiting for the wrong touch to make them snap. Julian Harrow felt it the moment he stepped into the breakfast room that morning. Conversation stopped too quickly. Eyes lifted, then dropped. Cups were held a little too firmly. Fear had found its rhythm. And fear, Harrow knew, always sought a conductor. A convenient shape. The idea formed gradually. Almost politely. It began with whispers among the staff. Cautious glances exchanged between guests. And the subtle relief people felt when suspicion leaned away from themselves. Adrian Bell did not help his own case. He slept poorly. He wandered the corridors at night. He avoided eye contact during meals. And worst of all, he was angry in a way that no longer tried to disguise itself. Margaret noticed it first. He looks hunted, she said to Harrow quietly. Or dangerous. Those are often confused, Harrow replied. Dr. Graves, however, was less philosophical. Adrian had motive, he said firmly. Bitterness, ruined prospects, emotional instability, and opportunity? Harrow asked. Graves hesitated. He knew the house well. So did everyone else. Harrow thought, but he said nothing. The evidence emerges. It was Eliza Crane who brought the first tangible piece of evidence. She entered the study pale, holding a small object wrapped in cloth. I found this, she said, unwrapping it carefully on the desk. A vial. Empty now, but faintly scented. Dr. Graves leaned forward. That's interesting. What was in it? Margaret asked. Graves inhaled cautiously. Digitalis, he said. In small doses, medicinal. In larger ones, dangerous. Harrow's eyes narrowed. A heart stimulant, he murmured, capable of mimicking natural failure. Silence followed. Eliza swallowed. It was in the music room, behind a piano bench. All eyes turned instinctively toward Adrian Bell. Adrian's face drained of color. That's impossible, is it? Whitmore asked sharply. You spent time there. I play there, Adrian snapped. Or I did. Harrow raised a hand gently. Where did this vial come from? Eliza hesitated. It was labeled with a pharmacy mark. A private prescription. Dr. Graves stiffened. Only I would have access to such medication. Unless, Whitmore interjected, someone took it. Graves looked genuinely offended. I would have noticed. Harrow did not interrupt. He was listening not to the words, but to the eagerness with which they were being arranged. Adrian, under pressure. Harrow requested to speak with Adrian privately. They met in the music room. The piano lid closed like a sealed mouth. You are becoming the melody everyone prefers, Harrow said calmly. Adrian laughed bitterly. Because it's easy. Easy does not mean true, Harrow replied. Did you know about the hidden passage? Adrian froze. Yes. When? Years ago, Adrian admitted. Sebastian showed me. He liked demonstrating how clever the house was. Did you use it that night? Adrian hesitated. Yes, he said finally. I went to the study. Harrow remained still. Why? Adrian's voice cracked. I wanted answers. About the confession. About what he planned to say. And did you see him? No, Adrian said quickly. The room was empty. The fire was low. I left. Harrow studied him. And the vial? Adrian shook his head violently. I didn't poison him. I did not ask if you killed him, Harrow said softly. I asked about the vial. Adrian slumped into a chair. He gave it to me, Adrian whispered. Years ago. Said it would calm my nerves before performances. Harrow's gaze sharpened. Did you know what it was? No, Adrian said. I trusted him. The house chooses by evening. The story had taken shape. A disgraced protege. A hidden passage. A vial capable of inducing heart failure. A man known to be awake late. Even Jonathan. Reed's notes leaned in that direction. It fits, Whitmore said grimly. Too well to ignore. Margaret watched Adrian across the room. He looks guilty, she said. Harrow shook his head. No, he looks afraid. Is there a difference? She asked. Yes, Harrow replied. A very important one. Harrow's private doubt that night. Harrow returned to the study alone. He opened the desk drawer once more, staring at the empty space where the notebook had been. Too neat, he murmured. Digitalis explained the how but not the why. Sebastian Mockingbird had planned a confession. One powerful enough to terrify someone into murder. Adrian had nothing left to lose. Others had everything. Harrow extinguished the lamp and stood in the darkness. The false melody, he said quietly, is always the most convincing. A public turn the next morning. Local authorities were summoned again. This time, their tone was different. Adrian Bell was questioned formally, not arrested, but marked as he was led away to another room. He looked once over his shoulder at Harrow. You don't believe it, he said quietly. Harrow met his gaze. No, he replied. And that is precisely why I am worried. Because when a house agrees too quickly on one song, it is usually because the real one is still being carefully hidden. Asterisk. Part 6. The broken note, the trouble with a convincing lie. Julian Harrow often reflected, was not that it fooled everyone, but that it invited complacency. Once a story settled comfortably into people's minds, they stopped listening for discord. At Mockingbird Estate, the false melody had taken hold. Adrian Bell remained isolated, watched carefully, but not yet accused outright. The others moved with cautious relief, as though danger had been contained within a single, convenient shape. Conversations resumed in muted tones. Shoulders loosened. Doors were left ajar again. Too soon. Harrow felt the note beneath it, all a faint, persistent vibration that did not belong. The medical detail Dr. Lionel Graves did not like being questioned. That fact alone made Harrow question him more. They met in the study shortly after noon. Sunlight fell across Sebastian Mockingbird's desk, illuminating the place where the sealed envelope had once rested. "You prescribed digitalis," Harrow said calmly. "Yes," Graves replied. "For select patients, under strict supervision. And for Sebastian Mockingbird?" Graves hesitated. "Years ago. As a precaution. Was he taking it recently?" "No," Graves said firmly. "There was no need." Harrow nodded. Then his heart should not have failed so quietly. Graves frowned. "What do you mean?" "A heart attack induced by digitalis rarely leaves a man seated peacefully," Harrow replied. "There is discomfort, disorientation, often movement." "But Sebastian did not move," Graves said slowly. "No," Harrow agreed. "He did not." The realization settled between them, reconstructing the night. Harrow gathered the guests once more. "Let us speak of timing," he said. "Not motive, not blame, only time." He moved to the mantelpiece. The fire was lit early evening, he continued. It burned low by midnight. Yet Mr. Mockingbird was found seated comfortably, not collapsed. This suggests he did not die suddenly. Margaret's breath caught. "You mean?" "He was dying," Harrow said gently. Slowly. The room stilled. "Digitalis alone would not be enough," Harrow continued. "Not without distress, unless combined with something else." "What?" Whitmore demanded. "Sedation," Harrow replied. Dr. Graves stiffened. "That is absurd, is it?" Harrow asked quietly. "A sedative would calm the body, dull the panic, and allow the heart to fail without struggle." Silence. "And such sedatives," Harrow added, "are not easily obtained." All eyes turned, slowly, toward Dr. Graves. A fractured alibi. Graves flushed. "You are implying—" "I am implying nothing," Harrow interrupted. "I am observing." He turned to Mrs. Holloway. "Did anyone request medicine that night?" Mrs. Holloway hesitated. "Dr. Graves visited Mr. Mockingbird after dinner." Graves exhaled sharply. "At his request. Did you administer anything?" Harrow asked. "A mild sedative," Graves admitted. Sebastian complained of agitation. Margaret's voice trembled. "You didn't tell us that." "It seemed irrelevant," Graves said weakly. "No," Harrow replied. "It seemed inconvenient." The notebook reappears. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Jonathan Reed burst into the drawing room, pale and breathless. "I found it," he said. "The notebook." Harrow felt a quiet satisfaction. "Where?" he asked. "In the garden," Reed replied. "Buried near the oak." The notebook was damp but legible. Inside, Sebastian's handwriting was precise, almost cruel in its clarity. Names, dates, transactions, threats, disguised as favors. Harrow turned pages slowly. He was preparing to destroy someone. Margaret whispered. "Several someones," Harrow corrected. One page, however, stood out. Note written in a different hand. Administer at 11:30. Ensure calm. Harrow closed the book. Broken note. The timeline shattered. Sebastian had not been alone. He had been visited. Calmed. Prepared. And then left to die. Adrian Bell could not have done this. He lacked access. He lacked knowledge. He lacked time. Someone else had stepped in, someone trusted, someone capable. Harrow looked around the room. "The melody you accepted," he said quietly, "is broken." Dr. Graves sank into a chair. "I didn't kill him," he whispered. "I only helped him sleep." "Sleep," Harrow replied softly, "can be very close to death." A new fear night fell again over Mockingbird Estate. This time, no one slept easily, because the false suspect had been revealed, and the true killer, whoever they were, now knew that Julian Harrow was listening very carefully indeed. Part 7. The Mockingbird's cage. Julian Harrow believed that truth emerged not from force, but from pressure applied patiently and precisely like tightening the strings of an instrument until the false one snapped. By the seventh night, Mockingbird Estate had become a cage. No one left. No one was allowed privacy for long, and everyone knew it. Closing the doors, the local authorities, now less dismissive and far more attentive, agreed reluctantly to Harrow's request. Until the investigation concluded, Mockingbird Estate would remain sealed. "This is irregular," the inspector said. "So was Sebastian Mockingbird," Harrow replied mildly. Locks were checked, phones monitored. The estate's isolation, once a luxury, became a liability. Margaret watched the gates close from the upper window. "He would have hated this," she murmured. "Yes," Harrow said, "which is why it is appropriate." The first interrogation. Charles Whitmore was brought into the study first. He tried humor. It failed. "You and Sebastian shared secrets," Harrow said. Whitmore scoffed. "Everyone did." "Not like you," Harrow replied. "You shared risk." Whitmore's jaw tightened. "You feared the confession," Harrow continued, "because it would have ruined you financially." Whitmore slammed his fist on the desk. "I didn't kill him." "No," Harrow agreed. "You are too loud." Whitmore stared. "Too loud?" "You panic outward," Harrow said calmly. "This crime required inward control." Whitmore sagged back. "Then why am I here?" "Because fear makes excellent pressure," Harrow replied. The second interrogation. Eliza Crane. Eliza entered composed and left shaken. "You managed his secrets," Harrow said. "But you did not own them." "I'd protected him," Eliza snapped. "And myself." "You removed the notebook," Harrow said. "Yes," she admitted. "To stop him." "Stop him from what?" "From destroying lives," she whispered. "Including mine. Did you poison him?" Harrow asked. "No," Eliza said firmly. "I wanted him silent but alive." Harrow studied her. "You underestimated how many others wanted the same." The third interrogation. Clara Finch. Clara wept before Harrow asked a single question. "He promised me security," she sobbed, then threatened to take it away. "What did he want in return?" Harrow asked. "Loyalty," she said. Silence. "And if you refused?" "He said he would expose my past." Harrow nodded. "But you did not kill him." Clara shook her head violently. "I couldn't." "You could," Harrow said gently. "But you didn't." The breaking point. Margaret Mockingbird entered last. She stood tall, hands clasped, eyes steady. "You loved him once," Harrow said. "Yes," she replied. "And then I survived him." "You knew about the confession." "I suspected," she said. Sebastian enjoyed endings. "Did you want him dead?" Margaret considered this carefully. "I wanted him powerless." Harrow nodded. A subtle distinction. She leaned forward. "You are circling something." "Yes," Harrow said. "Someone who believed they were saving him." Margaret's breath caught. "The cage tightens that night?" Harrow rearranged the house. Guests removed, rooms reassigned, paths crossed. Deliberately, pressure increased. At 2:17 a.m. A door slammed. Footsteps ran. A voice cried out. Harrow arrived to find Dr. Lionel Graves collapsed in the west corridor, clutching his chest, not in pain but in terror. "He knows," Graves gasped. "They know I helped. Who?" Harrow demanded. Graves shook his head. Too late. A fracture in the silence before dawn. Something shifted. A maid reported hearing sobbing from the garden. Harrow found Eliza Crane kneeling near the oak tree, hands muddy, the notebook clutched to her chest. "I didn't mean for him to die," she said brokenly. Harrow knelt beside her. "I know," he said softly. "But someone else did," Eliza whispered. "And they used me." Harrow closed his eyes briefly. The cage had worked, but the bird inside was not yet singing. The quiet before. Truth as morning light crept across Mockingbird Estate. Harrow stood once more in the study. Almost. He murmured. The killer was still among them. And the final note had yet to be played. Part 8. The last song. Julian Harrow had never underestimated the complexity of human nature. He had come to Mockingbird Estate expecting deception, subtlety, and misdirection. But what he encountered in the last days, the quiet fear, the whispered truths, the hidden passages, and the manipulation of everyone's emotions, was far more intricate than even he had imagined. Sebastian Mockingbird's death was not a simple act of violence. It was a carefully composed symphony in which each participant had unknowingly played a part. Now, with all the players isolated and the house itself becoming a silent witness, Harrow could finally reconstruct the final movements of this deadly composition. Morning revelation. The sun had barely risen. Yet Harrow was already in the study, notebook and papers spread before him. He traced the events step by step. Evening of the last dinner. Sebastian hints at a confession. Guests note his tone subtle but charged. Several are unsettled. Only he knows the weight of the secret. After dinner, guests retire. Adrian checks the piano, moves along the hidden passage. Eliza secures documents. Margaret watches silently. Whitmore retires, unaware he has been observed. Midnight. Sebastian takes a final drink, opens the desk drawer with the sealed envelope inside, ready to preserve the secret. He is calm, but his mind is racing. Someone else has been watching, calculating. Harrow paused. The timing was critical. A discrepancy between what the guest said and what the house's physical evidence suggested immediately pointed him toward the hidden passage. Reconstructing the hidden passage. Harrow returned to the west corridor. The panel was as he had found it days earlier, but now the logic of its use became clearer. Sebastian had arranged the drawer and documents to be accessed privately, anticipating his guests might try to read the papers prematurely. He had not intended for death to befall him at this moment. Yet the killer had exploited this arrangement. The hidden passage allowed a person to enter the study undetected, giving them the opportunity to administer sedatives that would keep Sebastian calm while a fatal dose of digitalis slowly induced cardiac failure. Harrow noted the act required timing, access, and knowledge of the house. That narrowed the circle to those who knew both Sebastian's habits and the layout intimately: Eliza Crane, Dr. Graves, and Margaret Mockingbird. The sedative and the vial found behind the piano, contained traces of digitalis. Alone, it could induce heart failure, but only if Sebastian's heart were susceptible. The sedative administered minutes earlier ensured he would not struggle, leaving the impression of a quiet, natural death. Harrow considered the physician's role carefully. Dr. Graves administered sedatives at Sebastian's request to calm agitation. Eliza Crane was aware of the location of all medications and could have redirected or misapplied them. Margaret Mockingbird had observed her husband for years, understood the timing, and had motive to intervene in a way that would guarantee his death appeared natural. The motivations. Harrow turned his attention to motive. Every suspect had opportunity. Fewer had motive. But in Sebastian Mockingbird's life, the strongest motivator was always fear of exposure, of ruin, of loss of control. Adrian Bell, anger and resentment over ruined career. Yet he lacked access and knowledge of sedative administration. His presence at the scene, though suspicious, was insufficient. Charles Whitmore, potential financial ruin if Sebastian revealed past manipulations. Yet he was out of the study at the critical moment, observed by multiple witnesses. Eliza Crane, guardian of Sebastian's secrets, capable of controlling information and access to medications. She feared exposure, but also had loyalty to Sebastian. Could she have acted alone? Possibly, but the notes suggested the act was premeditated to exploit someone else's routine. Margaret Mockingbird, years of subtle manipulation, deep understanding of Sebastian's patterns, personal stake in controlling the aftermath of his confession. She also had proximity, opportunity, and emotional capability. Harrow realized the truth was not a single act of revenge. It was orchestration. The confrontation begins. Harrow called all the guests into the drawing room. Their faces showed fatigue, suspicion, and a simmering awareness that the quiet was over. "The time has come," Harrow said softly, "to play the final note." He recounted the timeline in painstaking detail, noting discrepancies and corroborating evidence. The hidden passage, the timing of the sedative, the placement of the digitalis. Observed movements of each person. Adrian's shoulders stiffened. Margaret's hands tightened. Eliza's eyes flicked nervously toward the fireplace. Whitmore tried to hide a slight tremor. Harrow paused, letting the silence stretch. "Sebastian Mockingbird's death," he said finally, "was no accident. It was engineered to appear quiet, natural, perfect. Yet perfection leaves its own marks." The Mockingbird's last song. Harrow's voice softened. "The song here is metaphorical. A mockingbird sings freely, yet it is bound by instinct, environment, and fate. Sebastian Mockingbird composed the final movement of his life meticulously, thinking he controlled every note. But someone else decided how it would end." He turned slowly toward Margaret. "Madam," he said, "you understood him better than anyone. You knew his habits, his routines, his weaknesses. You feared the confession would unravel your security. You did not strike violently. You allowed the melody to resolve quietly, ensuring he would pass without struggle." Margaret's face remained calm, almost serene. "It is true," she said, "but I did not act alone." Harrow's gaze sharpened. "Who assisted?" Eliza Crane stepped forward, reluctant yet resolute. "I helped administer the sedative. I did not know the digitalis had been placed. I thought I was protecting him from agitation." The room fell silent. Every piece of the puzzle now made sense. The reconstruction. Harrow moved methodically, recreating the fatal scene. Evening. Sebastian retires to his study with the envelope. Guests are unaware of his exact movements. Midnight. Margaret enters subtly, timing her visit to coincide with the sedative administered by Eliza at her instruction. Final moments. Digitalis, already in place, induces heart failure. Sedative ensures no struggle. The death appears natural. Aftermath. The room is left as though untouched. Hidden passages and careful observation mislead all but the most attentive. "Notice," Harrow said, "how every act was calculated to manipulate perception. The true killer anticipated everyone's assumptions. They composed the perfect ending. Emotional truths beyond mechanics. Harrow understood the human dimension. Margaret acted from fear and self-preservation. Eliza acted from loyalty and manipulation. Sebastian, though brilliant, had underestimated the power of those closest to him. Adrian and Whitmore, though suspicious, were merely instruments in a symphony they never intended to join. Harrow allowed himself a moment of reflection. Murder, he realized, was not always about rage. Sometimes it was about inevitability. And sometimes the final song is the one we do not wish to hear. The final note, the confession of roles, left the guests reeling. The estate, too, seemed to respond. The walls creaked as if settling, doors sighed. And even the wind outside felt restrained. Harrow stood in the center of the drawing room, eyes on the assembled figures. "The last song," he said softly, "was not sung by Sebastian Mockingbird. It was sung by those who loved him, feared him, or both. And like any song, it will echo in these walls forever." A mockingbird cried once from the garden, a sharp, brief note that punctuated the revelation. Everyone paused, listening. It was the final chord. Part 9. Silence after applause. The revelation had settled over Mockingbird Estate like a winter fog, dense, cold, and inescapable. Julian Harrow stood in the drawing room, watching each guest process the truth. The confessions from Margaret, Mockingbird, and Eliza Crane had stripped away the last illusions. Adrian Bell, Charles Whitmore, and even Jonathan Reed had been cleared of direct responsibility, though none left unscathed. Every carefully maintained facade had cracked under scrutiny, yet Harrow knew the danger was not in the discovery, it was in what came after. Confrontation. Harrow addressed the assembled guests with calm authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "the orchestration is complete. Every instrument has played its part. But the final measure is not for me, it is for justice and for understanding." Margaret, sitting upright in her chair, met his gaze evenly. Eliza stood behind her, pale but steady. Harrow turned first to Margaret. "You understood your husband better than anyone. You calculated every step, ensuring that his death appeared natural. Yet you did not act in isolation." Margaret's hands rested on her lap. "I did what had to be done," she said quietly. "I protected myself. And my life." Harrow nodded slowly. "And yet, despite your control, you were not the only one shaping the outcome. Eliza, your loyalty to Sebastian and your fear made you complicit in this act." Eliza's lips trembled. I only administered the sedative. I thought it would calm him. I never intended to harm him." "Intent matters," Harrow said softly. "But so does consequence." The reaction. The room was silent, save for the occasional creak of the old estate. Each guest had been given time to absorb the truth. Adrian Bell's shoulders slumped, relief mingled with lingering fear. Charles Whitmore's jaw was tight. His hands fidgeted unconsciously. Margaret's gaze remained firm, though the weight of realization pressed heavily on her. Even Jonathan Reed, the journalist who had initially sought a story, seemed humbled. He had chronicled events with curiosity, but now he felt the gravity of human lives intertwined with deception. Harrow allowed the silence to linger. He knew it was necessary. The house itself, which had borne witness to the manipulation and fear, seemed to pause as if to acknowledge the truth. Legal consequences soon after, Harrow coordinated with the local authorities. Margaret Mockingbird would face charges of manslaughter. Her actions, though motivated by fear and self-preservation, were deliberate. Eliza Crane would also be questioned for her complicity, though her intent to protect Sebastian mitigated the severity of her legal consequences. The others, while witnesses and part of the orchestration of events, would not face charges. Harrow ensured that the process was orderly, protecting the innocent while holding the responsible accountable. Moral ambiguity. Harrow reflected on the nuances of justice. "Sometimes," he said quietly to Dr. Graves, who had assisted in the administration of sedatives at Margaret's instruction, "the line between right and wrong is blurred by necessity and fear." Dr. Graves nodded. "I thought I was helping," he admitted. "I believed it was mercy. And yet it ended in death," Harrow said. "Mercy can be a dangerous instrument." Margaret and Eliza exchanged glances, both silently acknowledging that their decisions, though justified in their minds, had irrevocably changed lives. Emotional fallout in the days following, the estate remained tense. The guests' routines were disrupted, and trust was irrevocably broken. Adrian Bell retreated to the music room, playing piano to soothe nerves frayed by suspicion. Charles Whitmore spent long hours reviewing business documents, though his focus was often distracted by the lingering tension. Eliza Crane and Margaret Mockingbird were isolated, struggling to reconcile their actions with conscience. Julian Harrow, meanwhile, moved among the rooms quietly, observing, noting, and ensuring no further deception lingered. The estate, which had once been a place of careful appearances and polished deception, now felt raw, stripped of pretense. The symbol of the Mockingbird Harrow paused one evening in the garden, listening to the faint call of a mockingbird hidden among the trees. The sound was brief, tentative, but persistent, a reminder that even in the aftermath of chaos, life continued. He reflected on Sebastian Mockingbird, brilliant, manipulative, and utterly human. His final acts had orchestrated not only his death, but the exposure of those around him. "The last song," Harrow said softly, "is often not the one we expect. It is not always beautiful, but it is honest." Margaret, standing nearby, listened without speaking. She understood now that her control had ended. The estate, the secrets, and the power Sebastian wielded had all passed into history. The song had ended, and silence had followed. A new order by the following week. Life at Mockingbird Estate began a fragile recovery. The authorities concluded their inquiries. The guests departed, some returning to normalcy, others to lives forever changed by what had transpired. Harrow remained behind briefly, walking the corridors and examining the spaces where so much of the drama had unfolded. Every corridor, every hidden passage, every room carried memory and consequence. He felt the weight of the estate's stories pressing gently against him, reminding him that human nature often hid its truths behind subtle gestures and quiet decisions. The house was calm, but it retained the echo of the last song. It would linger, haunting and instructive, for years to come. Reflections of Justice Harrow mused on the nature of justice and morality. Legal consequences were one thing, but the internal reckoning was another. Margaret had survived physically, but the burden of her choices would remain. Eliza had acted from loyalty, yet bore the weight of complicity. Others had been freed from suspicion, but they too would never forget the tension, fear, and revelations. Harrow understood the truth he had uncovered was delicate. Justice was not a loud proclamation. It was subtle, enduring, and sometimes mercilessly quiet. Closing scene as dusk fell over the estate. Harrow paused by the great oak tree where Jonathan Reed had found the notebook days earlier. The wind rustled the branches, carrying the faintest echo of a mockingbird's call. Harrow smiled faintly. "Some songs," he said, "are meant to end in silence, but their echoes last far longer than the note itself." And with that, he turned back toward the house. The final pieces of the mystery settled in his mind. Part 10. When the music ends, the final part of the story unfolded slowly, almost reverently, over the grounds of Mockingbird Estate. Julian Harrow knew that endings in human affairs were rarely abrupt. They were like the last note of a symphony, lingering, resonating, echoing through spaces long after the instrument had been silenced. Sebastian Mockingbird's last song had ended weeks ago, yet its echoes still vibrated through the walls, the corridors, and the hearts of those who had played a part in it willingly or unwillingly. Dawn at Mockingbird Estate. The first rays of light fell over the estate in a soft golden haze. Morning mist curled around the gardens like a slow-moving curtain. Julian Harrow walked the gravel paths, absorbing the quiet that had returned. The estate had become a sanctuary of reflection. Though its serenity was fragile and deceptive, Harrow had spent the previous night in the study, reviewing notes, examining the hidden passageways, and considering the human motivations that had orchestrated the tragedy. He understood fully that murder in this house had not been about anger or passion, but about fear, control, and preemptive self-preservation. Margaret Mockingbird stood at the window, looking out over the lawn. Her posture was elegant, unshaken outwardly, but Harrow could see the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremor in her fingers. Even she could not escape the weight of what had transpired. "Morning, Mrs. Mockingbird," he said softly. She did not turn immediately. "Morning," she replied after a pause. "The house feels empty without him." "Not empty," Harrow corrected gently. "It is full of consequences, echoes, memories. You can leave the man, but you cannot leave what he made you witness." Margaret nodded slowly. "And what of justice?" Harrow smiled faintly. "Justice is rarely loud. Sometimes it is quieter than any song he ever conducted. And it lingers much longer than we intend." The aftermath. By midday, the authorities had completed their interviews and processed the confessions. Margaret Mockingbird would face legal repercussions, though her actions, framed as preemptive and protective, would be weighed against her intentions and lifelong proximity to Sebastian's manipulations. Eliza Crane would remain free, with the acknowledgement that her role, though significant, stemmed from loyalty and fear rather than malice. Dr. Graves would remain professionally accountable for administering sedatives, but would be absolved of culpable intent. Adrian Bell and Charles Whitmore would leave unburdened, legally but psychologically marked by the revelations. Harrow had ensured that the proceedings were meticulous, careful to separate the actions from the intentions, the acts from the human frailty that had shaped them. Conversations of reflection in the afternoon. Harrow convened the remaining guests for a private discussion in the drawing room. The atmosphere was heavy with understanding, yet tinged with relief. "Each of you," Harrow began, "has been part of a complex orchestration, some by design, some by circumstance. The truth is now laid bare. What remains is reflection." Adrian Bell spoke first, his voice quiet but steady. "I was ready to be blamed. I thought I had caused his death just by being present, by disobeying his expectations. But I see now that I was a pawn in a larger composition. Margaret's eyes softened slightly. And yet, the truth does not absolve me of knowing what I did. I acted to protect myself, but also to end his manipulations. I feared exposure more than I feared his death. Eliza Crane added softly, I thought I was helping him. I never intended harm. But the weight of my actions is undeniable. Harrow nodded. Acknowledgement of responsibility is part of the human symphony. The song has ended, but the echoes, conscience, memory, and reflection persist. Revisiting the estate, Harrow spent the following days walking through every corridor, inspecting the hidden passageways, revisiting the study, and observing how the house seemed to breathe differently after the events. The estate itself seemed aware. Doors no longer whispered, floors no longer creaked with conspiratorial intent, and the shadows felt less deliberate. He paused before the great oak tree, where Jonathan Reed had discovered the notebook. The roots and branches had remained unaltered, yet the air around it carried a weight of memory. Some lessons, Harrow murmured, are etched in the earth itself. The Mockingbird's song is over, but its resonance will linger in these walls for decades to come. Even outside, a lone mockingbird called, sharp and fleeting, as if marking the conclusion of a performance, a reminder that life, though disrupted, always continued its rhythms. Revisiting the guests, each remaining guest left the estate with a mixture of relief, contemplation, and quiet grief. Adrian Bell returned to the city, his music now carrying a subtle melancholy. He played compositions tinged with reflection, never forgetting the control Sebastian had exerted over his career and the lessons learned from the chaos. Charles Whitmore retreated to his business affairs, yet he often paused in moments of solitude, reflecting on how trust can be fragile and appearances misleading. Margaret Mockingbird, though facing legal proceedings, embraced a quiet resilience. She understood fully the price of freedom and control, and the enduring presence of guilt intertwined with self-preservation. Eliza Crane remained in service briefly, finishing administrative duties at the estate. Yet she now moved with careful awareness that loyalty without judgment can carry unforeseen consequences. Harrow watched their departures, noting the visible shifts in demeanor, the weight they carried with them, and the subtle changes that such profound experiences leave upon human behavior. The philosophy of silence, standing alone in the main hall. Harrow reflected upon the nature of the Mockingbird's last song. Sebastian Mockingbird's life, he said softly to no one, was a symphony of control, manipulation, and intellect. He believed he orchestrated every movement, every note. And yet, as with all great compositions, an outside hand, fear, loyalty, or conscience can alter the final chord. The realization was almost comforting. Despite the darkness, the deceit, and the careful orchestration of death, the truth had emerged. The estate, the people, and the world around them were now free to respond to reality, unfiltered by secrecy or manipulation. Harrow wandered to the study one last time. He ran his fingers over the desk, now devoid of papers, envelopes, and secrets. The space was silent, empty, yet alive with the memory of what had transpired. The final reflection, as night descended over Mockingbird Estate, Harrow walked along the gravel path toward the gate. The moonlight illuminated the grounds, the house standing stoically against the darkness. But he thought of Sebastian, brilliant, controlling, human, flawed. He thought of Margaret and Eliza, who had acted under pressure and love and fear. He thought of Adrian and Whitmore, innocent in action, yet marked by proximity. The last song, Harrow whispered, is not about who lives or dies. It is about what is left behind. Lessons, echoes, understanding. It is about the human heart, which sings whether we are listening or not. From the garden came the faintest echo of a mockingbird's call, a single note, pure and haunting. Harrow smiled slightly. It was a reminder that even in endings, there is continuity. Even when the music ends, life continues, carrying forward lessons, regrets, and memory. He turned away from the estate, leaving the house to its silence, its echoes, and its stories. The Mockingbird's last song had ended. The world beyond awaited, carrying its reverberations.